I'm Barb Richards, and I'm a senior consultant at Habanero. I'm a huge advocate for the value measurement can bring to every organization.
And I'm Ben Skelton. I'm the Vice President of Habanero, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our thoughts on measurement and analytics with you today. Today's webinar will be 30 minutes. After the webinar is finished, there'll be 15 minutes to answer any questions you might have, so please feel free to submit questions during the webinar. After a brief introduction to Habanero, Barb's going to provide you with an overview of how we think of measurement and analytics, a bit of a measurement 101. Once that's done, I'll introduce you to the Royal College of Dental Surgeons of Ontario, and Barb will show you the success framework we put in place for their intranet project. We'll also take a peek at the college's new intranet called the Junction and show you a few of the dashboards we created for the project to measure success. Finally, as I said before, we'll have time for Q&A, so please feel free to send any questions our way. Let's get started. For those of you that don't know Habanero, we're a consulting company based in Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto. Today's webinar is unique for us as we're actually broadcasting from 2 locations. I'm in naturally beautiful Toronto, and Barb's in the bustling metropolis of Vancouver. At Habanero, our mission is to help people and organizations thrive. This is something we're incredibly passionate about in both the services we provide to our clients and within our own organization. We're extremely proud to be ranked the #1 best medium-sized workplace in Canada by the Great Place to Work Institute, our 6th year on the list. We believe that technology has an extremely important role to play in building thriving workplaces. As well-designed and engineered technology solutions can improve an employee's onboarding experience, foster a culture of safety, and even help an organization become more innovative. We're really proud of what the portals we create do, but one thing's always bugged us. A lot of the feedback we receive about our work is anecdotal, and we don't get a chance to understand at depth what's working, and just as importantly, what isn't working after our portals launch. It's a bit of a mystery. At the beginning of this year, we set an organizational goal to set up measurement and success programs for every one of the new portals we create to understand how people are actually using them. We want to know what's working well, and just as importantly, what isn't working well, so we can create something better in the future. This actually turned out to be good timing, as we're seeing greater interest from clients for more meaningful analytics. I'm sure many of you would agree that intranet budgets have been tightening over the last few years, and there's more and more rigor on intranet teams to show impact or ROI. We're also noticing a lot of companies are starting to care less and less about dumb or basic metrics like number of visits and page views. Although these are kind of interesting, we're seeing more and more interest from companies in learning how their portals are contributing or aren't contributing to the success of their organization at a more detailed level, which is really why we're here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb, and she's going to take you on the Measurement 101 journey.
Thanks, Ben. So I'd like to begin with a bit of Measurement 101 and share 5 things that we think will help you in your measurement activities. So the first thing we want to point out is this, that measurement doesn't actually equal analytics. So I think because these 2 concepts spend a lot of time together, that people's understanding of them gets quite tangled up. And you might notice in conversations people use them pretty interchangeably, but they're actually a lot more different than you might think. So in this next slide here, we'll do a little bit of untangling those 2 concepts. And so looking at the differences between them, we can see that measurement's really more about being a process, where analytics is more about being a tool. With measurement, it's actually more about words. Analytics is where you start getting more into numbers. Measurement's really about finding the right questions, and then you turn to analytics to actually get the answers. The other thing that measurement is, it's really about figuring out the evidence that you need, and then you again go to analytics to get that evidence. Some typical activities around measurement are workshops and mapping out your results. And then with analytics, that's where you get into things like analysis, reporting, managing your data, custom coding. So another difference, typical deliverables around measurement is like a measurement framework and KPI, which we'll show you later, and then getting your dashboard requirements. And then it's in analytics that you would do technical requirements, reports, and actually create your dashboards. As far as roles and the kinds of people that work on these two different areas, with measurement, some of the primary roles are facilitation, being a business or digital analyst, and then with analytics, that's where you get more into analysis and developers. So, I mean, you could summarize and say measurement's really about setting up things properly, and when you're measuring, and when what you're measuring is digital, the analytics is what you need to execute. The second point we want to make today is about vision and roadmaps. So these are both great tools for measurement activities, but they're not enough. So a bit about vision. Many of you likely have a vision for your intranet that includes some high-level goals and where you want to see your intranet in the next several years. Again, this is great input, but it's not actually a replacement for measurement planning. And then with roadmaps, you also might have a roadmap that includes priorities, actual features, functionality you're rolling out for the next year or so. There's probably lots in there that you want to measure. Again, also great input for your measurement activities. But these two things don't make outcomes as clear as you want or put them as front and center as you want, both of which are needed for a successful measurement plan. So what measurement does is really shine a light on those outcomes, and it should be quite a bright light at that. As you'll see a bit later, it also shines a light on the path that you've mapped to those outcomes, and that's actually, more or less a summary of what measurement's about. So stepping back and focusing on just your intranet outcomes is a really valuable activity. It gets everyone really clear and in alignment about what you're going to achieve, and this is also necessary for your measurement plan to be successful. So what we want to say here is don't forget your measurement workshops where you get really clear and specific about your outcomes for your intranet. Another point we want to make today is that with measurement comes great conversations. I think this is a really nice way to think about measurement. I don't think measurement always sounds really exciting. I don't know about you, but if you're at a dinner party and you start talking about measurement, I don't find you get the most enraptured crowd of people. And whereas actually analytics, on the other hand, actually there does seem to be a lot more interest about that. But I think it's a really misunderstanding about what measurement's about, and maybe it's measurement's poorly named. Because measurement is about asking words and having great conversations and really talking about your vision and your goals and getting people to share their ideas of success and what we need to do to be successful. So this is a better way to think about measurement. So a bit about these conversations is that with these conversations what you get is you get great questions and answers about what you're going to achieve and how you're going to do it. Another important point we want to make about these conversations is what you get with them is you get buy-in. Because people have now participated in identifying your outcomes, they've had a chance to talk about what's important to them rather than just being presented with something that they should measure. I also want to make the point here that it's really important to note that the best measurement plan will fail without that buy-in from conversations. You can have the most well-intentioned person in the world that's very informed about your intranet and your business. They could put together a rock-solid measurement plan for you, but without the buy-in you get from these shared conversations, your plan won't be as successful. So don't miss the opportunity to get shared ideas about what success looks like. So next up is that with clear language comes clear insights. So this is really important. And if you only take away a couple things today, I'd like to nominate this as being one of them. The reason is that you might have had the experience of identifying an outcome you think is really important to achieve, and then only to feel like that outcome's too hard to measure. And it's true that some things are inherently difficult to measure or really high effort, but it's also just as true that often when people think they can't measure something, it's because they haven't just spent enough time figuring out really clear language to describe their outcomes. To sum up this point, you probably heard the expression that you can't manage what you can't measure. That's a pretty popular expression to throw around in measurement discussions. But I'd like to follow that up with saying you actually can't measure what you don't clearly define. So that's a very important thing to focus on when you're doing measurement. So to share some examples of what we actually mean by that, here are some outcomes we often see our clients looking for with their intranets. So you can see those concepts on the left are really important. It'd be hard to find somebody who would disagree that those are important. But the problem with them is that they're much too vague. So on the right, we've given some examples of where we've gotten much more precise and clear about what we mean about those terms. So to give some examples, with productivity, what we actually mean by that is reducing time when it comes to finishing tasks and finding information. With employee engagement, some of the things we mean when we're talking about employee engagement is reducing frustration and giving people more opportunities to interact with their colleagues. Again, going through a couple other concepts we hear people talk about a lot. Customer service, that's really talking about reducing clients having to wait, finding information for them quicker. And then again, around communication, it's a lot of times our goals around that are we want employees to say they actually feel informed about what's happening. So don't forget to take the time to define what you really mean when you're doing your measurement planning. The last point we want to make in the Measurement 101 is know when to focus on your tools. So if you've been involved in measurement or analytics for a while, you might have been cautioned or advised at some point to not get too focused on your tools. There is some truth to that. When you're figuring out your outcomes and how you're going to achieve them, focusing on your tools can be a distraction, and it is better to not focus on them then. However, if you're measuring something digital, it is your analytics tools that are going to be the way you execute on that measurement plan, so you do need to focus on them after you've done your measurement activities. So thinking back to when we talked about the difference between measurement and analytics, you might have remembered that creating a measurement framework and identifying metrics is a measurement versus an analytics activity. So in this slide, you can see that during the research and design phase, we have measurement activities happening early on, and that's when focusing on a tool can be more of a distraction than be helpful. Once you're done those measurement activities, you do need to identify your analytics requirements, what you need to capture in your tool, and that's when you should get to a decision about a tool and start investing and focusing on your tool, because that's what you're going to need to execute on that measurement plan you've created. Unfortunately, we see a lot of clients that have a tool implemented and aren't getting the benefits they could because they've not invested in either setting it up properly or they don't know how to use it well enough to get the reports that would be really valuable for them. So after you have a measurement framework, you do need to invest in your tools. So that's the last point we wanted to cover in our Measurement 101, and I'm going to turn you back over to Ben so you can meet the college.
Awesome. Thanks, Barb. So let's take some time to meet the College of Dental Surgeons of Ontario. The college is the governing body for dentists in Ontario. Their mission is to protect the public's right to quality dental services by providing leadership to the dental profession in regulation. The college has been growing and is now over 80 employees. One interesting fact was that they didn't actually have an existing intranet, which was a bit unique for us. Typically, we go into most organizations and they're refreshing or rebuilding an intranet, but there's something there. The college was really unique. They didn't have anything, so most things were done by paper. And so it was a bit of an interesting process for us and a bit of a fun project starting from scratch. As this was the college's first intranet and it was a significant amount of time and effort for them, we wanted to make sure that we had a success framework in place to measure the value of the new portal, which they called the Junction. Now Barb's going to take you through that success framework.
So the name of the intranet for the college, as I believe Ben mentioned, is the Junction. And so here we've got some questions around their success framework. We found you can boil a success framework down to 3 questions. In this case, is why does the junction exist? Why is what the junction does important? And what is the junction going to actually do to provide business value? So you can really, if you're doing your measurement planning around your intranet, take these 3 questions, and getting the answers to them is really a big part of doing your measurement framework. We do recommend you replace the junction with the name of your actual intranet, which we were sure you were going to do, but just want to make that clear. So let's go through those 3 questions and show you how to answer them. So the first question is, why does a junction exist? The answer to this is really at the center of your success framework. So just to show you how that looks like. So we identified 5 main reasons for the junction to exist. So the first one there is, as a professional organization, it's really important for people to share and find knowledge resources. It's also important for people to share and interact with each other and learn about and find each other, as well as be informed about what's happening at the college and easily get frequently accessed resources. So tying back to the point about clear language, hopefully you can see that we're being quite clear and precise about what the junction is going to do. And hopefully you'll see that this is also really important and key to tie together the rest of the framework we're going to show you in the next couple slides. So next up is why is what the junction does important? So this is the next question to ask. And another way of saying it is, why do the things we identified before, why do they really matter? So we map this out to business value, which we'll show you in the next slide. So here, what we've done is mapped what the junction does to different areas of business value. And we've identified 5 main ways of business value that the junction supports. So it supports shared professional knowledge, which, as we mentioned, it's an organization to support professionals. It also supports a great employee experience. That's something important to most progressive companies these days, and we see more and more in our measurement plans. It also helps build relationships between employees And on that note, during the research phase, we heard the college has grown a lot and you don't always know the people in the elevator anymore. So there's quite a bit of value in helping people get to know each other. Also productivity by minimizing wasting time, another fairly typical area for measurement on intranets. And then the last one, reducing paper. So as Ben mentioned, it's a new intranet. That was a really big theme in the research we did. So when you don't have an intranet, what you do is get a lot of reliance on paper, people printing off stuff to use as reference. People were lamenting the death of trees with all the paper. So the internet's a great opportunity to support this goal, and you'll see that most of what's on the Junction is an alternative to this. So we like this kind of mapping because it clearly shows why your internet's important and what kind of outcomes you're working towards. So there's one last question to finish off this diagram, which is, what is the Junction going to actually do to provide that business value? The reason that's got an asterisk on it is that that's the area, now we start to sort of bridge measurement and analytics. That's where you flip over to the kinds of stuff you're going to start digging into your analytics and reporting, which you can see a bit more clearly in the next slide. So now what we've done is map the different features and functionality on the Junction that support the reasons support why the Junctions exist, which in turn map to business goals. You'll get to see most of these features in a second when Ben shows you the Junction. But what you can do with a mapping like this is you can pick any feature in your intranet and really explain its value. So just taking one example, People Finder in the middle, you can see that supports people learning about and finding each other, which in turn supports all the areas of business value you have up there. So besides being a great communication tool, this helps you find the useful data in your analytics tool and then makes reporting on the features much more meaningful. So just to recap on this, it's a really great tool to communicate in a really concrete way what you're doing to provide business value, and then it's a great tool to identify your analytics requirements. Worth noting that a lot of that stuff there wouldn't be in an out-of-the-box analytics tool, so identifying things up front helps you implement your analytics tool better, which then leads into easier and more straightforward reporting. Third reason these kind of frameworks are really good is that it helps align people and guide your design team, anyone making decisions about what's going to be supported on your intranet. By getting really clear what you want to accomplish, everyone can focus their efforts and make decisions accordingly. So next up, identifying goals. After you have the framework we showed you, this is where you can get more specific and start defining the actions you want people to take. And again, this is going to now tie into your analytics, right? So here we see some goals around value areas we'll be tracking on the Junction that you'll see in a moment. And what you're doing here is getting into the details and the reports that you want in your analytics tool. So to take a couple examples, we know we are tracking kudos because we want to see how much sharing and interacting is taking place. We also want to track the People Finder because we've got that mapped to business goals. So this kind of tool really is a great guide in what you want to get out of your analytics tool as well as what you want to report on. Some of you might have had the experience of going into a web analytics tool and feeling overwhelmed. You're not sure where to get the information that you want. So the nice thing about doing an exercise like this is now you can go into your tool knowing exactly what you want to look for. One of the last things that you can do as part of your measurement planning and framework is identify expectations. So we like to use the term expectations with intranets as opposed to targets. Find that conversations feel a lot more natural with people. Targets is more of a word if you're doing marketing sites as opposed to intranets. And here you've got a chance to be both optimistic and realistic about what you want to achieve with those different goals and identify some expectations. And what you're doing here is giving yourself a chance to track your goals and identify triggers where you might need to follow up. So what I mean around this is around kudos. Ben's going to show you kudos in a second. But if those aren't being used, which is basically recognizing your colleagues online, if those aren't being used as much as expected on this, now you can start digging around why not. Do people need help and guidance? Are leaders setting examples by using them? What's holding people back and why aren't you achieving your goal? So to summarize, it's a tool to help you plan when you need to take action to get better adoption or even potentially retire features if they're not meeting expectations. So with that, I'll turn you over to Ben so you can see how all these things actually look like on the Junction.
Awesome. Thanks, Barb. So now that you guys have seen the success framework, let's meet the Junction. Before we do, I've got a couple of disclaimers for you. The first is that the portal hasn't launched yet. The college is putting the final touches on their new intranet, but remember, this actually shouldn't matter anyway. Your success framework and analytics tool should be set up and configured before launch. So what you're going to see is the tool running in QA mode. The second, what you're looking at in the screenshots and dashboards isn't real content or data. We're also using habanero pictures to protect the privacy of college employees. So let's take a peek. Here's the homepage of the Junction where college employees will start their day. I'd like to give a special shout out to an organization called Public Good Social Marketing and Communications. We were lucky to have such a great partner to provide creative direction and illustrations in the portal images you'll see today. If you take a look at the top of the screen, you'll see the People Finder. The People Finder provides a way to quickly find employees by simply entering 3 characters of a first or last name. Immediately, you can see a picture of the employee, their title, and their extension. This is going to allow the college to replace their paper phone list, which needed to be replaced every time somebody joined or left the organization. If you click on an employee's picture or name, you'll go to their profile where you can learn more about them, their role, and their skills and experience. This is an awesome example of a feature that addresses a number of the goals in the success framework that Barb showed you, and as such, we're going to be measuring a number of these interactions. As you can see, the Junction's organized into 5 categories. My Department, where you can find all the resources, procedures, etc. for your department. The Knowledge Library, which is the single place to share and find college-wide resources, of which you can imagine the college has many. The How Do I section, which provides any answer you may need. Employee Essentials, which replaces a big paper-based binder. And College Life, which is the place to learn more about the purpose and vision of the college, find out what's going on, and where areas like the Buy and Sell Forum live. The What's New area combines 3 different types of news into one area: college news, knowledge library updates for new resources added to the knowledge library, and finally, social committee news. The goal of this section is to connect college employees and help people provide insight into what's going on. As Barb will show you in the dashboard, we're tracking the different news types to gauge interest. As an interesting aside, during our research, we found that a few people said, you know, I really want work news only. I don't want any of the social news. So we're actually doing a bit of an experiment. We're going to track interest in news to see if this is actually the case, or if people do want the social news, they just don't want to admit it. Further down the page, you'll see what's happening area, which lists the various college-wide events. Everything from social events to lunch and learns is listed in this area. If you scroll down further, you're going to see the People Spotlight. The People Spotlight features an employee at the college and provides a little bit of information about them and also their role. Not only does this help people meet others in the organization, but it provides a fun way to understand the different departments and roles and what they do at the college. Finally, at the bottom of the page, you'll see my favorite feature. This is the photo gallery. More and more, we're finding that information is shared and stories are told in organizations through photography. I kind of liken it to a bit of an Instagram culture in corporations. Anyone at the college can email a photo to the address, and the photo will be displayed on the homepage of the portal, which they can do from their mobile devices. What's kind of interesting is that the college isn't moderating these photos at all. So anybody can go, email a photo to that address in the college, and boom, it goes up there, and they can write a little description on what that photo is about. Not only does this connect people, but it provides a unique way for people to share what's going on at the college. Finally, if we scroll back to the top and look at the right side, there are a number of different content areas. The last one I want to point out is further down the page, and that's one Barb talked about a little bit before. That's the Kudos Corner. The Kudos Corner is a place where any employee in the organization can leave a kudo for another for doing a great job. Others can like and comment on the various kudos. Not only does this help facilitate recognition, which we know is a key pillar in a great employee experience and a fantastic workplace, but it also helps people understand what others do and how they contribute to the organization. We'll be measuring Kudos Corner activity at the college to see how it's used. Speaking of measurement, I'm going to turn it over to Barb, and she's going to show you the first dashboard for the Junction.
Thanks, Ben. So first, I'd like to say that the Junction's not, as Ben mentioned, the Junction's not launched, so you're seeing a dashboard that's been set up, and it's showing data from our QA tester. So if some of the numbers look a little funny, that's why. So this dashboard is something we've called People Interactions, which is actually one of our favorite dashboards. Ties into a couple goals we saw in the Success Framework about sharing and interacting and finding and learning about each other. So to show you some of the things that Ben pointed out, we've got the people finder. We wanted to make sure we track the people finder, both the autocomplete, when you get some quick basic info, as well as the search that gets you more. Ben mentioned that's doing a lot of replacement of paper, in addition to supporting those goals of making sure how often people can easily find each other and learn about each other. And we're expecting that to be a really highly used feature. Another thing we're tracking is the kudos that Ben showed, and as he mentioned, we're finding more and more kudos on intranets can play a really positive contribution to company culture. So we're tracking these as well as working on getting them up. And so we want to see how much people are leaving them, how much they're liking them in a sense of actually clicking on the like, and then replying to them. And so as we noted in our goals and expectations, we want to have half the employees leaving a kudos within the first few months of launch. So now we have this analytics set up, so now we can track and see how close we're getting to that goal and make some interventions to try to get that number up. At the bottom, we have the buy and sell. So always an interesting one to show. We find it's kind of a controversial feature on intranet. Some people really pro buy and sell on intranet. Some people are a little anti it. We've decided it's been included on the Junction as a way for employees to interact with each other, as well as drive adoption. So we're tracking that as well. And as a bit of a side note, what we're going to also check is if people that use the buy and sell, are they bigger users of the Junction overall? So, is it really an effective tool to drive adoption or not?
This is one of the reasons I think, Barb, that I talked about us wanting to get more analytics and more understanding of what people are doing on our portals, because I think this is a great example of something that's controversial. And so to be able to bring answers to clients and say, your buy and sell forum will actually have this impact on adoption is going to be a really powerful thing across a number of industries and intranet. So these are the kinds of insights we're really excited about as we kind of venture into our measurement program.
Yeah, I think this is an area we're all very curious about. Do people that use buy and sell, do they use more pages on average? Do they visit more often? So I think we've got some people that are having bets different ways in that one. Okay, so next up is supporting, the buy and sell. So next up is the people search. So we're also tracking the people results search page. So that means the page you see when you've searched for somebody. So for example, I've searched for John, and now I want to see the John on the first floor, or I want to see the John in accounting. So I've got ways of filtering people there. And so now that second column there, those three widgets there, we can now see how often people are actually using those different features on the search page. Are people using the location, department, skills? So then we know how important that functionality is to people. Ties into, do people know it? But sometimes people don't know about that feature, so we can use that as a tool to figure out, are people aware of it? Maybe they don't need it. And also it's a great tool to get some insights into what people are actually looking for, especially things around people skills, like what kind of skills are people actually trying to find in the organization. The widgets in that third column there tell us how much people are actually viewing profiles of other employees. So that means I've actually clicked on John and viewed his overall employee. And I can also see views and edits of of people editing their own profiles to see if they're actually doing work on their profiles to share out information. So that's great because we can see how much the internet's being used to support those goals of sharing and finding out about each other, as well as getting some insight. Do people need to know more about these tools? Do we need to do more promotion and awareness? Or is it a feature people aren't that interested in and maybe we reduce our support to them? The final column there is different ways of sharing. So we've got the people spotlight. It helps people learn about each other. And then the photos, which Ben mentioned. So again, seeing the uptake on those and again, tying into Ben's point about doing some learnings about how much that photo feature is a tool for adoption. And then even tracking the feedback form to the manager, which we consider a people interaction here. So with that, I'll turn you back over to Ben to look at the knowledge library.
Perfect. So the knowledge library is that one place where you can find college-wide resources. Everything from information on dental treatments to fee guides is present in this section. Employees can search the library or use one of the categories or subcategories below to drill into the resources available. No pun intended.
So this is a dashboard to report on the knowledge library that you just saw. So the college has spent a fair bit of effort on this feature, both to build it, figure out the categories and the topics, get resources in there. So we do want to track what's happening in it. So here we can see how often the knowledge library is searched and as well as the terms that people are using. We can also see which resources are being viewed on it, what are the top ones that people actually need. And then we can see how often those different categories and topics are clicked on. So all of that's great for managing that feature, making that feature better, as well as getting a better understanding of the knowledge resource needs of the employees at the college. So Ben, I think, has got some more how do I stuff to show you now.
Perfect. So finally, I thought we'd provide a quick peek at the how do I section. So the how do I section is a pretty typical section in most intranets. It organizes key information into various categories and answers questions both new and seasoned employees may have. Everything from how do I request a vacation to how do I make coffee is answered in this section. And here's the dashboard.
Yeah, so this is a content analysis dashboard with the how do I in it. So you can see how often the how do I is used, as well as the top pages in the how do I section. And this content analysis dashboard is one that we do for most of our clients, and really what it does is surface the top areas within each section. And typically if you've done a measurement framework and created your intranet around that framework, typically those sections map quite nicely to goals. So in here you can see how there's different of those mapped to finding information quickly, sharing, knowledge sharing. So it's a really great tool for seeing how you're doing in different areas, as well as anyone managing content in your organization and content authors. So that wraps up our brief tour of the Junction and a few sample dashboards we're using to track the success. And so some of you might be curious, how do you start incorporating some of those things in your project today? And if you are curious, you're in luck because Ben's got some tips for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Barb. So here are 5 things to think about as you start your measurement journey. The first, identify clear outcomes for your intranet. This may seem pretty obvious. You may have them documented already, but if you're like many organizations, your goals and objectives for your intranet may be vague or unclear. This is often the best place to start. The second works hand in hand with the first, as you're identifying your goals, is having those collaborative conversations to get buy-in. As Barb mentioned earlier at the beginning of the webinar, don't short-circuit this part of the process. It can be extremely valuable to have conversations with different groups and different people in your organization to understand what you want your intranet to do. The third, figure out who would benefit from your insights you can provide and what they need to know. This may be the group that you have your collaborative conversations with, but it might include a wider group within your organization. As we start tracking features that talk more to culture, it'd be really interesting to see almost a cultural dashboard of your organization and what's the overall feeling in the company over time. The fourth, get to know your software. As Barb mentioned, there's a time to focus on measurement and your goals and a time to focus on the analytics software. I always find that people kind of mix it up. We find that people focus on the software too early when it's really not that important, and then later on, when it is important, they don't take the time to understand the tool inside and out, which can reduce the value of your measurement program. And finally, and I believe most importantly, actually use what you learn to improve your portal. Measurement and insights are useful, but what's the most exciting is when they're used to actually improve the portal. This is the goal. Understand what's working, what isn't, and make what isn't better. So that wraps up our session today. We hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to open the floor to some Q&A. And the first question is, what are the most common things you see companies wanting to measure? Barb, how about you take that one?
Okay, that's a great question. So there's a couple things you saw today. I mean, there's an interest in productivity. I wouldn't say that's front and center. Definitely the employee experience, things around news and communication. More and more we're seeing things like around safety impact, so the role that portals can play on safety, for example, like policies and procedures. And then another really good one, or common one, particularly for companies that have products and services, is the customer service. So the impact on a portal to help like frontline staff serve customers. I would say some big ones. Any other ones that you can think of, Ben?
No, I think every organization, I think the key is that the generic measurement isn't as useful, a specific measurement of the things that you care about. So I think it's always nice to have generic measures, but the most valuable ones are the ones that are super meaningful to your organization. Perfect. Next question, what tools do you recommend using? We're not a huge tool company, so we try not to focus on the tools that much. That said, on most of our intranets, we've used two different tool sets. The first is Google Analytics, and we use that because the barrier to entry is really low. So that's a tool that we've used for some of our intranet projects. Another tool that we use is a product called Web Trends, and I think it's really an enterprise-grade analytics tool, and it's got a lot of different functionality. And so those would be the two tools that we would use. Okay, another question. In answering the 3 questions about why your intranet exists, do you have to go through them in a particular order or all at once? Maybe you can talk to that, Barb.
Yeah, that's actually that's a really good question. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. We find it's a bit of a back and forth. Yeah, it would be nice to say it was so simple as to start like 1, 2, 3, but there is getting a sense of what's important to your business, and then thinking about what you can do to that, and then finding the opportunities within intranets, and then mapping those back to the business. So I guess a shorter way of saying it is pretty iterative, and it's not as simple and 1, 2, 3 as it might have seemed in that slide. It is a bit more of a back and forth process.
Cool. I think what's important too is, although in the presentation we showed this be very linear, where you've got your success framework and then you do your design, I think this stuff is really iterative, where your success framework helps your design, and then your design actually gets modeled back into that success framework. And so as you build out these features like kudos or different areas of your portal, as your designers are starting to envision some of this stuff, you may actually find that there's new requirements or new features that you want to measure. So I think it's important that it's not only linear. And another important point is, if you've started your design or if you've developed your intranet already or you're in the implementation phase, doesn't mean you can't do a success framework right now. You don't have to do it before your design. You can do it anytime. Obviously, it's better if you do, but we're realists here.
That's the reason we like sort of encouraging a lot of conversations around it too, because even if things that don't get officially baked into the plan, if you've got conversations going about that, those outcomes can get baked into different parts by different people at different stages.
Cool. We got another question. This is actually kind of a fun one. Everyone wants to measure hits. What is hits really telling us? What is the argument against hits? Where do hits work? Somebody told me a joke once. I don't know if it's appropriate for the webinar, but HIT stands for How Idiots Track Success, which I thought was kind of funny. I don't know. Hits are it's a usage metric. That's for us what all it is. It shows when somebody's actually hitting a page, but what I'm much more interested in is engagement measures. So is somebody actually not hitting a page, but are they interacting with a news article, for example? Are they more likely to comment on a certain type of news article? Do they like a news article of a certain type? Those to me are a lot more interesting measures than just pure traffic or hits to a page. Barb, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, on the note about your inappropriate joke, there's some, I mean, at the risk of, I don't want to insult anybody, but there's something. It's a very basic way of thinking about things, and yeah, I don't think, I mean, once you start really looking at things, you get past hits pretty quickly, and even mapping to business goals is not just about hits, right? And it is more about, you might not do something that has a lot of hits, but it could be really high value to a number of users. So people need to get past hits for sure.
Yeah. And I think the next question actually kind of ties into it a bit. Early in the presentation, you spoke about moving beyond boring views and let's see here, boring views and visits. Yet your dashboard showed views and users, visits. How are you moving beyond the basics in analytics to drive measurement to provide real value? I think that's an awesome question, and I think you always will have views and visits. I think it's interesting to know how many people are viewing something. But if you take a feature like the People Finder, for example, we're trying to figure out, and you can see there, how many people are actually using the autocomplete feature. So how many people are actually going to the People Finder and typing in 3 characters. And that's basically where we think most sessions will end, because that replaces that manual phone list. So I type in 3 characters, I find somebody's extension, and I dial them up, and that's an interaction. But we're also testing their more complicated interactions where you click somebody and get their profile and learn a little bit about them. So that's something else we want to track. In addition, we didn't show you in the People Finder, but there's a third way to actually search. So I can go to the People Finder, type in a skill, and hit the search button at the bottom, and that actually allows me to find people with a certain skill. So I think you're always going to track boring views and visits, but we're much more excited right now on how people are using the various tools that we're providing. Barb, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a foundation, views and visits. It's more tying it to other things. And then, I mean, this was only a 30-minute webinar, so we weren't able to get into some other things, but, you know, it is then tying it to those outcomes, like, you know, looking at employee engagement and employee experience, like, is that actually getting better, right? So, you know, a year down the road, the college should look at, you know, have they reduced their paper? You know, do people feel more informed? You know, do people feel like they know their colleagues a bit better? So that's where you are getting past the views and the hits. But yeah, you still have to start there. But what we'd say is you should tie them to, you know, not just basic views and hits of the portal overall. It's like it is looking at specific things that you want people to do that support bigger outcomes.
Perfect. Another question here. The examples seem to show page views goals only. Is that all you measure? Is it practically possible to measure how did the user need to find information X, or did the user find what he or she was looking for? I think that's an awesome question. One area where we actually do this quite well, I think, is we put a widget on search pages, and we call it our search feedback widget. And we've done this for a number of years on our portals, and what it does is when you do a search, so you type in a query, on the results page there's a little widget on the right-hand side, and it actually says, did you find what you were looking for? And the question is, yes, the search gave me the results I wanted and it was great. I did, but it was kind of hard to use, or no, I didn't. And interestingly enough, that's a bit of it gives us analytics on how the search is doing, but much more importantly, it actually ties to your portal management governance framework, where you can go and say, so what we've seen portal managers do in the past is actually respond to every piece of search feedback, either put in a best bet, update the search engine, or get content authors to create new content, and then ask the users to rerun their search and see if they can find the content that they're looking for. And that's a really powerful thing. It's not an easy answer, like did people find X or Y, but I think search is one of the most used ways people use a portal to find information. So.
That's a good question. That does tie into the things that some things are harder to measure. The other thing there is that there are some interesting things around the search. Like we do see on some portals search use just sort of tapering off. Like so if you do see people not using search much over time, like you might start off on a launch or something and see people like 10% of people are using search, but sometimes you do see a decline because it's not working for people, so people stop using it. Another indicator there is if you don't have quite a long tail of search terms in your portal, that's also a sign search isn't working well because people are just coming there to search for like the 20 things that they search for. So there's other indicators there to tie together. And that was another point we thought about putting in this webinar, was just about tying together qualitative data and like looking at having to combine different things to put together a story. So that question is you can't just go to one place in your analytics and get the answer. You do have to piece it together from a few different points.
One thing you can do too is, and we've seen this be quite effective, is on certain pages have a was this content useful for you, yes or no, tie that in. Anytime somebody indicates that a page wasn't useful, actually ask them why that content wasn't useful, and then actually feed that back to your content authors, and you can measure that as well. But again, it's a bit of a manual intervention. It's not an automated way to find, people are taking this amount of time to find X.
Yeah, search is such a big one on Intranet. There's something to be said for that one. By using your analytics to get a really good idea. Are people using it quite a bit? That's a great sign. Are they using it for lots of search terms? Another great sign. They're clicking through, that's a great sign. And then there's just old-fashioned asking people, like, how's the search working? Because that's something you actually hear about from people. Our search sucks or our search is great. And then it's the analytics that really add a lot of color and fullness to that picture.
Perfect. And final question. Do you add trends over time or compare periods in your dashboards? I find absolute numbers are interesting, but comparing trends also helps uncover insights. I'd love your thoughts on that. I think definitely. I think as Barb said, we often go into new projects talking about expectations. These are our expectations, but once you have your expectations and you launch, I think it's really reasonable then to have targets to look at trends over time. I'll give you a great example. What we see in a lot of social networks is adoption. You spend a lot of time, or social tools in an intranet, you spend a lot of time and energy getting people to adopt the tools, and so your adoption increases and increases and increases. But what we see over time is you tend to then focus a little less on adoption, and if you look at the trends over time, you actually tend to see the use of them decline. So it shows that you always need to have a bit of a rigor around adoption and having people use the tools. And if you think of it like a garden, you always want to be watering. You can't just plant it once, put lots of water at the beginning and expect it to grow. Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us. You can see Barb and my email addresses on the screen. If you've got any more questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to send us an email. Thanks for attending today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.